First jump, Cherry? You scared, princess? Do me a favor. Don't lock up in my door and take the whole stick to the ground with you." The words came out of the open paratroop door of a C-17 over the whine of 2 turbines, spooled to idle, and a couple of the younger jumpers laughed because the man saying them wanted them to. Sergeant First Class Garrett Pruitt stood in the door with one boot on the lip and one hand on the frame. Sunglasses up, jaw set, the picture of a man who owned the 11 feet of aluminum he was standing in. He was talking to a woman near the back of the chalk, helmet on, chin strap correct, hands quiet at her sides. She didn't laugh. She didn't flinch. She didn't look down. The ramp was a sheet of June heat. 11 o'clock in the morning, and already the tarmac threw it back up at them in waves, the kind of heat that made the painted lines shimmer and the windsock hang half dead off its pole. A chalk of jumpers stood in the shade of the wing. Recertification jumps, the routine ones, every newly assigned jumper on the installation, knocking out a static line pass so the records would say current. Nothing tactical. No combat load. A Hollywood jump in the old slang. Easy day. The woman in the back was 47 years old, though the helmet and the borrowed harness hid most of that. She had drawn her gear an hour earlier from a rigger who didn't know her, signed a hand receipt with a name nobody had read yet, and stood in the manifest line without a word. Her records were still in transit between installations. There was no rank visible anywhere on her. The harness covered the chest, the helmet covered the head, and she had volunteered nothing. To Pruitt, that made her a blank. And a blank on his ramp was a cherry until proven otherwise. Her name was Vivian Rourke. She had already, without being asked, traced her own static line from the universal static line, snap hook, down to the pack tray, hand over hand, feeling for the routing, the way another person might check a seatbelt. Then she had reached over and restowed a sloppy bite of webbing on the harness of the kid next to her. 2 fingers, done before he noticed. Old habit, the kind of habit that doesn't switch off. The kid next to her was 19, Private First Class Caleb Ruiz on his 4th jump, and looking like it might be his last by choice, sweat sheeting down a face the color of putty. His hands wouldn't stay still. Pruitt had already gotten to him twice. "You gonna cry on me, Ruiz?" And the second time had nearly tipped the boy over the edge. Rourke turned her head a few degrees toward him. "Eyes on me," she said. 2 words. Low. Breathe. He looked at her. He breathed. Off the edge of the ramp, in the thin shade of a forklift, Master Sergeant Lyle Bishop watched the whole thing and felt something not line up. Bishop was the drop zone safety officer that day, 41 years old, 22 of them around parachutes, and he had developed the particular eyes of a man whose job was to notice the one thing that would kill somebody. He was watching the cherry. He was watching her hands. Cherries didn't have hands like that. Cherries fumbled the snap hook, double-clutched the static line, looked at their feet. This one had cleared her own line and stowed her neighbor's without looking, and now she was breathing like a diver. Slow, square, the breath of someone managing her own heart rate on purpose. He frowned. Something about the week's traffic tugged at him. A memo, a name, but the heat and the noise pushed it back down. "Manifest. Listen up," Pruitt's voice carried. "Winds are bumping. We load when I say, load." The net crackled. The wind talker on the drop zone reading gusts. Numbers climbed. Bishop already knew what the numbers meant before Pruitt did, because Bishop had been doing this longer. But it was Pruitt's chalk and Pruitt's call. The gusts crossed the limit. 13 knots, then a gust to 17. Over. "Wave off," the net said. "Hold for weather." Pruitt stepped back off the door lip and pulled his sunglasses down and grinned at the woman in the back of the chalk like he'd done her a favor. "Lucky cherry," he said. "Wind saved you. Get to enjoy the ground a little longer. He let the laugh build and ride. Deplane. Recycle. Don't wander off, Princess. The chalk shuffled back down the ramp into the heat. Rourke went last, unhurried. She did not take the bait of hurrying, and she did not take the bait of dragging her feet to make a point. She simply walked, the way water finds the low ground, and as she passed the door, she ran her eyes once over the anchor line cables out of habit, the way she had run her eyes over 10,000 things. Behind her, Pruitt held the door and watched her go, and enjoyed himself. And Bishop, at the edge of the ramp, watched her reach back without looking and check the boy's static line one more time. The hold was supposed to last 20 minutes. Pruitt decided to fill it. He had the chalk in the shade of the green ramp shed, a long, open-sided building of concrete and corrugated steel that smelled of jet fuel and hot dust, and he decided that the Cherry needed remedial pre-jump training, and he decided to do it where everyone could watch. Since we got time, he announced, and since some of us have never done this before, let's run actions in the aircraft. For the Cherry. He planted himself in front of Rourke, hands on hips. The chalk made a loose horseshoe around them, the way a crowd makes a ring around anything that might be a fight. "Tell me the 4 points of performance," Pruitt said, in the slow voice you'd use on a child. "Take your time. If you don't know, just say so, and I'll teach you." Rourke looked at him. Then she said them, clipped, in cadence, the way they live in the spine of anyone who has them. Proper exit, check body position and count. Check canopy, gain canopy control. Keep a sharp lookout during descent. Prepare to land. A beat. Land. Pruitt's mouth tightened a half millimeter. "Memorized," he said. "Good for you. What about malfunctions? You know what you do when your chute doesn't open, Cherry, or do you just scream?" "Total malfunction. You execute your cutaway and go to reserve," Rourke said. "Streamer, cigarette roll, no inflation. Total. You don't try to fix it, you don't have the altitude. Partial. Line twists. Slipped riser. A May West. You assess. And if you've got a controllable canopy and enough air, you ride it and steer for the panel. You don't cut away a canopy that's flying you to the ground just because it's ugly." She paused. "You taught the recovery backward a minute ago, by the way. You said control, then count. It's count, then control." The shade got very quiet. It was a small thing. It was the kind of small thing that only matters in a place where small things are the entire profession. Two of the older jumpers in the horseshoe stopped smiling, because they had heard it too, and they had heard her fix it. Pruitt covered it the way men like Pruitt always cover it, with a laugh and a pivot. "Listen to this. Cherry read the manual on the bus over." He turned to play to the crowd. "I love the enthusiastic ones." While he was turned, Rourke stepped sideways to the jumper on the end of the horseshoe, a specialist who'd been rigged up for an hour in the heat, and put 2 fingers on his left shoulder, where the universal static line snap hook had been routed wrong, the safety wire seated, but the hook itself crossed over the carrying handle in a way that would foul on exit. She didn't announce it. She freed it, reseated it, gave the static line a short tug to seat the bite, and stepped back. The whole correction took 4 seconds. The specialist looked down at his own shoulder, looked at her. "Thanks," he said, quietly, and the word landed in the quiet shed louder than any of Pruitt's jokes. It was not a dramatic fault. It would not have killed him, probably. But probably is a word that does not belong anywhere near a parachute, and every experienced jumper in the horseshoe knew the difference between a hook that was fine and a hook that was probably fine. A crossed snap hook can foul on the carrying handle at exit. A foul at exit is a towed jumper, a body slammed against the side of the aircraft in the slipstream at 130 knots, a problem that has to be solved in seconds by people who do not have seconds. The regulation that governs that hook exists because of funerals. Rourke had read the hook in a passing glance, the way a mechanic hears a bad bearing in a running engine, and she had fixed it without making a speech about it. And that, not the recited card, not the corrected brief, was the thing that turned the temperature of the shed. Two of the older sergeants in the horseshoe traded a look, the kind of look that says, "That's not a cherry," the kind of look that, in a profession built on small competences, carries more weight than any words. Bishop, drifting closer along the back wall, saw it all. He didn't say anything. He filed it the way he filed everything, in the part of his mind that kept people alive, and the tug came back stronger now. A name, a memo about the schoolhouse, an evaluator inbound this week. He looked at the woman's hands again. Steady. Always steady. "Where'd you say she transferred from?" Bishop said, half to himself, half to Pruitt, low as he passed. Pruitt didn't hear it, or didn't want to. He was already moving on, already deciding the cherry's competence was a fluke, a memorized card, beginner's luck dressed up as knowledge. He'd met the type, read a few manuals, watched a few videos, thought they knew the job. The door would sort her out. The door always did. "Beginner's luck," he said, loud enough. "Sit down, Cherry. Let the grown-ups talk weather." Rourke sat down on the long aluminum bench against the wall, helmet in her lap now, and the first thing anyone could see clearly was her face. Calm, unremarkable, a few lines around the eyes, dark hair pulled back tight and flat under where the helmet had been. She didn't look like anything. That was the point. She had spent a career learning to not look like anything. She looked at Ruiz, across the shed, still pale, and she tipped her head a few degrees. "Come here." The kid came and sat, and Bishop, watching the cherry quietly take the most frightened person in the building under her wing, turned and walked toward the manifest desk to find her name on a piece of paper. He didn't find it. Not at first. The roster on the manifest desk had her line hand-annotated in pen, recert, records in transit, and a hand receipt number where a full record should be, because the system hadn't caught up to wherever she'd come from. Bishop ran a finger down the page twice. A last name, an initial, nothing else. He stood there with the clipboard and felt the tug get louder, and still couldn't make it speak. Out in the shed, Pruitt found a roll of green tape and a marker. He wrote on a torn strip of paper, in block letters, the word "cherry," and he walked over and stuck it on the front of Rourke's harness, dead center on the chest, with a flourish, to a fresh round of laughter from the younger half of the chalk. "There," he said. "Now everybody knows. Don't lose it. It's a big day." Rourke looked down at the paper on her chest. Then she looked back up at Pruitt. She left the tag where it was. That was the thing the chalk would talk about later, the ones who were paying attention. She left it on. She didn't tear it off and throw it down, which would have given Pruitt a reaction to feed on. She didn't argue. She wore the word he'd given her like it cost her nothing, because it cost her nothing, and a joke that costs its target. Nothing has nowhere to go. The younger jumpers piled on for a few minutes because that's what chalks do. First jump jokes. Somebody asked if she'd packed a clean pair of shorts. Somebody else did a bit about crying in the door. Rourke let it wash past her like weather. Then she turned to Ruiz, who was not laughing, who was somehow more scared watching them mock her than he'd been about his own jump. And she went to work on the only thing in the building that actually needed her. "What's your exit count?" she said. 1,000, Ruiz started, voice shaking. 2,000. Slower. You're not counting to get it over with. You're counting to give your canopy time. 1. She tapped her knee once, a metronome. And 2, and 3, and 4. Check canopy. Try it. He tried it. His voice steadied on the third number. Your reserve drill. Show me. Don't tell me. Show me. Hands. He showed her. Pull. Look. The whole sequence, his hands finding it. Good, she said. Your body already knows this. It learned it in the tower. Your job in the door is to get out of your body's way and let it do the thing it knows. That's all. You don't have to be brave. You just have to not interrupt." She paused. "Brave is overrated. Trained is what saves you." The kid looked at her like she'd handed him something solid to hold. And the strange thing, the thing 2 or 3 of the older jumpers noticed and couldn't have put into words, was that the laughter had started to feel wrong. Cheap. The cherry had spent the entire hold being more of a Jumpmaster than the Jumpmaster, and now she was doing the one thing nobody else in the shed had bothered to do, which was take care of the most frightened soldier in it. The jokes thinned, then they stopped. If you have ever watched someone get judged and dismissed by people too lazy to look at what's right in front of them, too sure of themselves to open the book on the desk, then you already understand why this channel exists. If this story is pulling at something in you, do this for us. Subscribe to Honor Tales and stay to the end. It matters more than once. Across the shed, Bishop set the clipboard down with the unfound name on it and looked up, and across 40 feet of concrete and hot dust, his eyes met Rourke's for the first time, and a question began to form on his face that the rest of his morning had been refusing to ask. The winds eased. The net called it down. Gusts back inside limits, steady, jumpable. And the shed came alive with the particular energy of people who have been told it's on again. Riggers moved, jumpers stood and shook out their legs. Pruitt clapped his hands once and took the manifest desk like a man retaking a throne. And then he reached for the one lever a Jumpmaster actually owns. "Before we reload," Pruitt said, loud to the room but at her, "I've got a problem. I've got a jumper I can't verify. No record in the system. No currency I can see." He held up the annotated roster like evidence. "I'm not putting an unverified cherry on my aircraft. That's not me being mean. That's regulations. You want to jump on my bird, you show me your current." It was, on its surface, correct. That was the ugly cleverness of it. A Jumpmaster is responsible for every soul that goes out his door, and "show me your current" is a thing he is allowed to say. But everyone within earshot understood what it actually was. It was a man who had been quietly corrected 3 times, reaching for the one weapon his position handed him, and dressing it as safety. Rourke stood. She reached into the cargo pocket of her trousers and took out a jump logbook. It was worn soft at the corners. The cover was taped along one edge where it had split years ago. It was the kind of object that doesn't get that way sitting in a drawer. She held it out across the desk. "It's all in the book," she said. "Open it." Pruitt didn't open it. He glanced at it the way you'd glance at a child's homework and waved a hand. "Anybody can carry a book, Cherry. I can carry a book that says I'm an astronaut. Doesn't mean I'm flying to the moon." A few laughs, thinner now. "I need a verified record, not a diary." Rourke looked at him for a moment. Then she set the logbook down on the desk, squared it to the edge with 2 fingers, and stepped back, hands open at her sides. Her breathing hadn't changed once since the door. Slow. Square. The breath of a person who had been in much worse rooms than this one, and had learned that the worst thing you can do in a bad room is hurry. "WX Scrub, unverified jumper, held," Pruitt said, writing it on the roster, narrating it, making it real on paper. He was bumping her from the reload, on the record, in front of everyone. That was when Ruiz spoke up, which surprised everyone, including Ruiz. "Sergeant, she's the squared-away one," the kid said, voice cracking but going anyway. "She fixed Dawson's snap hook. She knew the malfunction stuff better than—" "Did I ask you, Ruiz?" Pruitt didn't even turn his head. "You want to get bumped too? Sit down." The kid sat down. Bishop was at the end of the desk now, close, and he watched Pruitt refuse to open the book a second time, and his jaw set hard. Because the name on the roster was Rourke, and the memo that had been tugging at him all morning had been about the schoolhouse, about a new standardization and evaluation officer reporting this week, and the memo had said a name, and the name had been Rourke, and Bishop's whole body had just gone cold with the math, even though his mind was still refusing to finish it. He didn't say it. Not yet. He needed one more piece, and the piece was sitting closed on the desk under Pruitt's elbow. The rigger picked it up. Sergeant Annie Dunmore, 26, the rigger who had issued half the gear in the building, reached across to take the logbook so she could note the hold against it, the way you annotate everything, and as she lifted it, the cover fell open to the first page in her hands. She read it. She went still, the way you go still when the floor of a thing drops out from under you quietly. Her eyes moved down the first page, then flicked to the second, then came up, not to Pruitt, but to the woman standing calm behind the desk with a paper tag that said Cherry taped to her chest. Dunmore opened her mouth, closed it, looked back down at the book. She didn't say anything. Not yet. But she didn't put the book back down either. She held it against her chest like something that had become, in the last 4 seconds, heavier than it looked. Bishop saw the rigger's face. And Bishop, who had spent 22 years learning to read exactly that expression on exactly that kind of face, finally let his mind finish the sentence it had been refusing to finish all morning. He pulled Pruitt aside. He did it the right way, quietly, a hand on the shoulder and a tilt of the head toward the ramp edge, away from the chalk, the off-record place where senior men fix things before they break. The two of them stepped out into the white sun. "Garrett," Bishop said. "Low. Walk it back." Pruitt blinked at him. "Walk what back? She's got no record. I'm covering the aircraft. That's the job, Lyle. You of all people." "I know what the job is." Bishop's voice didn't rise. It got flatter, which was worse. "I've been doing the job since you were in high school. Listen to me. If she's who I think she is, you stop this right now. Quietly. While it's still small. Who you think she is." Pruitt almost laughed. "She's a cherry the weather bumped. That's the whole story." "Cherries," Bishop said. "Don't fix a misrouted snap hook with 2 fingers without looking. Cherries don't correct your malfunction brief in cadence. Cherries don't stow a stranger's static line out of reflex. And cherries," he nodded back toward the shed, "don't make Dunmore's face do what it just did over the first page of a logbook." That landed. Pruitt's certainty flickered, just for a second. Then he rebuilt it, because a man who is committed in front of his chalk cannot afford to be wrong yet. "She memorized a card," he said. "Don't make this weird, Bishop. It's a Hollywood jump." Inside the shed, framed by the watcher's eyes, Rourke did the small things the watcher knew to look for. She wasn't looking at Pruitt. She wasn't looking at the book in the rigger's hands. She was reading the room the way she read everything. Eyes moving once across the windsock, visible through the open end of the shed, then the load plan taped to the post, then the door of the second aircraft on the ramp, then back to the boy. A scan. A loop. The same loop she'd run 1,000 times in 100 worse places, the involuntary inventory of a person whose life had depended, more than once, on knowing where everything was before anyone needed it. She checked her altimeter with a glance, and her reserve handle with the back of one knuckle, not because she doubted them, but because the hand does what the hand has always done. There was a particular grammar to the way she moved, and Bishop had spent 2 decades learning to read it. She never reached for anything twice. She never looked at her hands while they worked, because her hands had been doing these things so long they no longer required supervision. When a gust kicked grit across the shed floor, she registered the wind shift before the dust reached her, a small tilt of the head toward the open end, the involuntary arithmetic of a person who has spent her life betting her body on the air. Cherries fought their gear. This woman wore hers the way she wore her own skin. You could not fake that. You could not teach it in a week or a month. It came from years and from nights, and Bishop had begun to suspect, watching her, that some of those nights had been the kind he had only read about in citations. Bishop watched her through the shed's open side and felt the last of his doubt go. "The name on the roster is Rourke," he said quietly to Pruitt, out on the ramp. "Tell me that doesn't ring a bell. Tell me you didn't read the same memo I did this week." And for the first time, something moved behind Pruitt's eyes. Because he had read it. Or he'd half-read it, the way you half-read a memo about the schoolhouse on a busy morning, and a name had gone by, and he had not connected a name on a memo to a quiet woman in borrowed gear with a paper tag on her chest, because why would he? She was a cherry. He had already decided that an hour ago and built a whole morning on top of the decision. "No," Pruitt said, but it came out a half-second too slow. Dunmore was trying to get his attention now from inside the shed, the logbook still in her hands, lifting it, a question on her face. Pruitt waved her off without looking, not now, busy being right, busy holding the line he'd drawn, because the line was the only thing he had left. Bishop stepped back. He gave it one more minute. He was a careful man, and a careful man lets a thing reveal itself rather than forcing it, especially when forcing it would only let the wrong person say later that he'd been ambushed. So he stepped back, and he let the manifest table and the closed then open book and the woman who had not raised her voice once do the work. What was in that book would have ended the joke on the first page. One page. That's all it would have taken, at any point in the last hour, if a single person with the authority to bump her had been willing to open it. Stay with us and watch the page finally turn, and subscribe to Honor Tales, because the moment it turns is the reason you came. The shed held its breath. So, in a way, did the morning. Some more. While the shed argued over a currency card, the book on the desk sat closed, and inside it, in columns and dates and a few small printed stars, was the reason it weighed what it weighed. Most of the jumps in it were ordinary. That was the thing people never understood about a logbook like Rourke's. Most of any real logbook is ordinary. Page after page of routine, the same drop zones, the same aircraft, the same good canopies, because that is what a career actually is. But the ordinary entries went back across more than 2 decades, in different colors of ink, in the cramped hand of a young soldier, and then the steadier hand of an older one. And the sheer number of them told a story before you ever reached the ones that didn't look ordinary at all. There was a year, deep in the middle of the book, that the columns changed. Static line entries gave way to free fall. Altitudes climbed. The notes got shorter and stranger. Oxygen, night, stack, infill. And there was one entry on a page near the worn part of the cover with a small mark beside it that the regulations call a combat jump star, and a date in the spring of 2010, and almost no words, because some jumps don't get words. That night lived in her the way certain nights live in certain people, not as a story she told, but as a temperature she carried. She had been 31. The aircraft had been black inside, the kind of dark where you know your team only by the green chem light on the back of the next man's helmet and the shape of him against the open ramp. They had gone out the back into air that was 30-some thousand feet of nothing, and far below zero, oxygen masks fogging, the cold a living thing that reached through every layer and found the skin. A high jump, a long glide, miles of it under a blacked-out canopy, navigating by altimeter and instinct toward a postage stamp of ground they could not see until they were almost on it. Her jump partner had been a man named Adrian Mercer, Sergeant First Class, the kind of teammate you get maybe once. He had a saying, dumb and perfect, that he repeated before every jump until it stopped being a joke and became a prayer. Check mine, check yours, every time. He'd say it on the ramp at altitude with his mask on so it came out muffled, and she'd say it back. And they'd both grin like idiots in the dark. Over the objective, in the last 1,000 feet, his canopy failed. The narrator will not draw the picture, because some things shouldn't be drawn. It is enough to say that the air gave her no time and no choices, that she did everything that 20 years of training had built into her hands, that she reached the place where the math said he would be, and that the math was right, and it did not matter. She completed the infiltration alone. She did the job. She came off that drop zone with the team's mission accomplished, and a piece of her landing gone wrong enough that she still felt the weather in that ankle 16 years later. They gave her a star for the jump and a ribbon for the valor, and she put both away in a drawer and didn't wear them loudly, because the only person she had wanted to show them to was not there to see them. And she came home with a habit she would never put down. She checked everyone's static line, every jumper, every time, whether it was her job or not, whether they wanted it or not. 2 fingers down the webbing to the pack tray, because there had been one line. One night, she could not reach in time, and her body had decided on its own, without consulting her, that it would never let that happen again if checking could prevent it. That was why she had stowed a stranger's webbing on the ramp an hour ago without thinking. That was why she had taken the most frightened soldier in the building and taught him to slow his count. The book on the desk was not a resume. It was a list of everyone she had brought down safely, and it existed in the shape it did because of the one she hadn't. The man refusing to open it thought it was a bluff. The cruelest, simplest fact of the whole morning was this: the only person in the building who had not looked inside that book was the one person whose entire morning was about to be rearranged by what it said. Everyone else had started to feel it. The rigger had read it. The watcher had done the math. The chalk had gone quiet. Only Pruitt, who had drawn his line and could not now undraw it, stood with his elbow on the cover and his certainty held together with tape, like the book itself. Inside the shed, Annie Dunmore stopped waiting for permission. She walked the open logbook across the floor toward Bishop, holding it flat in both hands the way you carry something full to the brim, and the chalk parted for her without quite knowing why. The winds were green, the aircraft was ready, and Pruitt, out of patience and out of road, decided to end it the way he'd started it, with his authority, out loud, in front of everyone. He came back in from the ramp and planted himself at the desk and pointed at Rourke. "Here's where we are," he said. "You're bumped. Unverified. Weather held. Off my manifest. I don't have time for tourists on a jump day. So clear my manifest area and let me run my chalk. We'll sort your paperwork some other time, Cherry." Off his manifest. Out of his shed. An order, given to a jumper he had never once bothered to verify, in front of the chalk, the rigger, the boy, and the drop zone safety officer. It was the kind of thing that, said to the wrong person, ends a man's morning. It was documentable. It was witnessed. It was the bright line, and he walked across it at a stroll, certain the ground would hold. Rourke looked at him. For the first time all morning, she looked at him directly, full on, and something in her face changed. Not anger, nothing as warm as anger. It was the look of a person who has been waiting patiently for a thing to finish and has just watched it finish. The patient look. The look that comes right before the part nobody enjoys. She almost smiled. Her hands stayed open at her sides. Her breathing stayed slow. "You still haven't opened the book on your own desk," she said. "I don't need to open the book." Pruitt's voice climbed for the first time, because some part of him could feel the floor moving and was trying to outrun it with volume. "I need you to clear my—" "Sergeant!" Bishop's voice cut across the shed flat and hard. "Stop talking." The whole building stopped. Bishop crossed to the desk. Dunmore put the open logbook into his hands, and he held it for a moment, reading, his face doing the thing the rigger's face had done, the thing that travels through a room without a word, the recalibration, the quiet horror of a man realizing the size of the mistake unfolding in front of him. He set the logbook flat on the desk. He turned it around so it faced Pruitt, and he slid it the last 6 inches. "Open it," Bishop said quietly. "You've been told 3 times. Open it." The chalk had gone silent. Ruiz was on his feet without remembering standing up. The paper tag still said "Cherry" on the woman's chest, and somehow, now, that was the most damning thing in the room. Pruitt looked down at the open book. The first thing the eye finds on a page like that is not a word. It's the volume. Column after column, line after line, a density of entries that you cannot fake and cannot memorize and cannot carry casually. The unmistakable thickness of a life spent going out of aircraft. The running total at the bottom of the page was a number in the 4 figures, not 100, not a few hundred. Roughly 1,400 jumps. Then the eye starts to read. Free fall columns, night entries, oxygen notations, a small printed star beside a date in the spring of 2010 that any jumper in the world would recognize on sight, because you do not get that star from a manual or a tower or a bus ride. You get it one way, and the way is the worst day of your life. Master parachutist. And then, in the endorsement block, in the careful printing of a military freefall school, the qualifications that took the air out of Pruitt's chest, 1 line at a time. Military freefall parachutist. Military freefall jumpmaster. Military freefall instructor. And the last endorsement, the one that turned the whole morning inside out, the Standardization and Evaluation Authority, the signature line of the person who certifies Jumpmasters. At the top of the page, where the regulations require a name and a rank, it read, Rourke, V. CWOR, Chief Warrant Officer 4. Pruitt's face did the thing faces do when the ground they were standing on turns out to be air. Confusion first, a flicker of this isn't, this can't. Then disbelief, the eyes going back up the page to find the lie and not finding it. Then recognition, slow and terrible, as the memo he'd half read that week finally surfaced and connected. New Standardization and Evaluation Officer, reporting this week, Schoolhouse Rourke, to the quiet woman he had tagged with a paper sign and ordered out of his shed. And then the last thing, the cold drop at the bottom of it, the understanding of exactly who he had spent the entire morning calling a cherry. The door at the end of the shed filled with a new shape. Chief Warrant Officer 5, Sage Abernathy, 50 years old, the senior freefall standardization chief on the installation, ducked under the lintel and came in out of the sun looking for someone. He was not in a hurry. He was not putting on a show. He found Rourke across the shed, and his weathered face cracked into the easy grin of one professional finding another in an unexpected place. Chief Rourke, Abernathy said. They told me my new evaluator was reporting this week. Nobody told me you'd be out here knocking out a recert with the cherries. His eyes went to the paper tag on her chest, and one eyebrow went up a careful degree. That a new look for the standardization branch. There was no formation. Nobody called the room to attention. Nobody saluted. It was simpler and heavier than that. 2 of the most qualified parachutists on the installation, recognizing each other across a shed full of people who had just understood, all at once, what they had been watching. Bishop spoke, low, almost gentle, the way you'd tell a man a hard, true thing you didn't enjoy telling him. He said it to Pruitt, but the whole quiet shed heard it. She's the one who signs your Jumpmaster certification, Sergeant. Rourke reached up, peeled the paper tag off her own chest, looked at the word on it for a second, and set it down on the open logbook. Cherry, face up, on a page that said otherwise in every line. Remanifest me, she said to Dunmore. Not to Pruitt. I've got a jump to make. She loaded the next lift. She walked to the aircraft with the chalk, and she hooked up. And when the green light came, she went out the door the way the book promised she would. A clean, square exit. Body flat and stable in the slipstream. No flailing, no fear. The exit of someone for whom the door held nothing it hadn't already shown her 1,000 times. From the ground, the chalk watched her canopy open, clean, and steer, crisp and unhurried, all the way down onto the panel in the center of the drop zone. Dead center. The competence the book described, written once more in the sky in front of everyone who'd laughed. Back in the shed, Pruitt stood over an open logbook he had refused 3 times to open. She came in off the drop zone walking easy, gathering her canopy in a deployment bag the way you do it 10,000 times, and the shed had not really started moving again because nobody was sure what came next. What came next was the part that made it an honor tale story, and not just a comeuppance. She did not call the military police. She did not announce an investigation. She did not stand Pruitt in front of the chalk and take him apart the way the chalk, frankly, was now ready to watch her do. She had the authority to end his mourning, his rating, and a good chunk of his career with 3 sentences and a signature, and everyone in the building knew it, and that knowledge sat in the room like heat. She walked up to him at the desk, where he stood with the open book and the paper tag. Sergeant Pruitt. Her voice was level. It carried only as far as it needed to. Your door's good. I watched you run it this morning before you knew I was watching anything. Your commands are sharp. Your timing's clean. Your hands know the aircraft. That's real. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. Pruitt waited for the other boot. It is worse, sometimes, when it doesn't come the way you've braced for. But your judgment is not good, Rourke went on. A Jumpmaster owns every soul that goes out his door. That's the whole job, not the swagger, the responsibility, and a Jumpmaster who won't open a logbook on his own desk, who decides who a person is before he reads a single line about them, is a Jumpmaster who is going to get someone killed, eventually, because he was too certain to check. A pause. I have buried what too certain to check costs. I'm not going to watch you grow into it. She let that sit. Here's what happens, she said. You're not getting bumped off your rating today. You're going to earn it back, in front of me. You're going to rerun your door brief, correctly. And you're going to do it for the most frightened jumper in this building. And you're going to do it like his life is the only thing in the world that matters, because in the door, it is. Pruitt looked at her. Whatever he'd expected, it hadn't been a second chance with conditions, and the surprise of it cracked something in his face that the humiliation alone hadn't reached. If you've ever wanted to watch competence answer contempt without raising its voice, to see the person who could destroy someone choose instead to make them better, that's the whole reason this channel exists, and the whole reason you're still here. Subscribe to Honor Tales and stay with us to the end. There isn't much of it left, and it's the part that matters. Pruitt reran his door. He did it correctly this time. Every step, no swagger in it. And somewhere in the middle of it, a thing happened that nobody scripted. He turned to Ruiz, the kid he'd rattled twice that morning, and he walked him through his exit count and his reserve drill slow and patient, the way the way Chief Rourke had done it in the shade an hour before. He looked, for a few minutes, like the Jumpmaster he could be instead of the one he'd been. Rourke watched with her arms crossed and said nothing, and, At the end, gave a single short nod, which from her was a great deal. "You'll retest with me next cycle," she said. "Properly. If your judgment's caught up to your hands by then, you keep the rating. If it hasn't, we'll keep working until it does." She almost smiled again. "That's not a threat, Sergeant. That's the job. Mine, now." Late in the day, the drop zone went quiet. The aircraft were shut down. The chalks had cleared. The heat had finally started to lean toward evening, the long light coming in low and gold across the panel where her canopy had landed dead center hours before. Rourke sat on the open tailgate of a truck with the worn logbook in her lap and a pen in her hand, and she filled in the day's line the way she had filled in more than 1,000 before it. Date, aircraft, drop zone, a clean recert jump in column ink. Jump 1401. She did not write anything about the morning. The logbook didn't care about the morning. It only kept the jumps. She looked at the new line for a moment, at the long stack of lines above it climbing back through years and aircraft and a small star in the spring of 2010. And then she closed the book and ran her thumb once over the taped corner and put it back in her cargo pocket where it lived. Across the drop zone, a last lift was finishing, a makeup pass for the jumpers the weather had cost. And she watched the C-17 turn onto final and the jumpers come out the door one at a time, small dark shapes blooming into canopies against the gold sky. The third one out was Caleb Ruiz. She knew it was him before she could have known it, by the count. The clean, unhurried count she'd taught him in the shade, his body finally getting out of its own way. His exit was square, his canopy opened clean. He steered it down, a little wide of the panel but safe, and he hit the ground, and rolled, and came up. And even from across the drop zone, she could see the way he came up. Grinning, standing taller than he had all day. Not a cherry anymore. A jumper. He saw her on the tailgate and jogged over, gathering his canopy in his arms in a clumsy bundle, still grinning. And he didn't have the words for what he wanted to say, so he just said, "Chief, I did the count. The slow one. It worked." "I told you your body knew it," Rourke said. "You just had to stop interrupting." He laughed, breathless. Then, because he was 19 and had to ask, "Is it true you've got 1,400 jumps?" 1,401, she said, "as of today." He shook his head like the number was a kind of weather. Then he turned and started hauling his canopy toward the turn-in point, walking on air, and Rourke watched him go. Out of an old habit she would never put down, she reached out as he passed and ran 2 fingers down the trailing edge of the static line, dangling off his deployment bag, checking it, seeding it, the gesture she had made 10,000 times for 10,000 jumpers, and once, on a dark night long ago, had not been able to make in time for the one that mattered most. The line was fine. The kid was fine. They were all, today, fine. Bishop walked over after a while and sat down on the tailgate beside her, the way old soldiers sit together without needing to fill the air. They watched the last lift finish in silence for a minute. "You could have ended him," Bishop said finally. Not an accusation, a question almost. "I could have," Rourke agreed. "He'd have deserved it this morning." She watched a canopy settle. "But I've been the certain one, the young, sharp, certain one who knew exactly who everybody was the second they walked in the door. It took me a long time and a bad night to learn the difference between confidence and judgment. Somebody could have ended me before I learned it. They didn't. They made me better instead." She turned the worn book over once in her hands. "I'd rather make a good Jumpmaster out of him than make an example out of him. The Army needs the first thing more than it needs the second." Bishop thought about that. Then he nodded, slow, and they let it go, because there was nothing to add to it that wouldn't make it smaller. She sat alone on the tailgate after he left, in the gold light a while longer, the worn book a familiar weight against her thigh, and watched the last canopies come down soft on the panel, and did not think about the man who had called her a cherry because he had already become the smallest part of the day. The largest part was the kid walking away taller. The largest part was always that. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.